We're taking a look back at the biggest political turning points, trends, and controversies as we hit rewind on Rising. We've got the power players, scandals, and outrageous decisions that have defined our conversations. UFO whistleblower David Grusch has doubled down on some bombshell claims, maybe the most explosive being that the U.S. government has killed people who tried to go public with stories about non-human spacecraft, telling News Nation's Elizabeth Vargas last night. Let's watch.
You recently did an interview with Joe Rogan on his podcast, and you said something that really took me aback. You said that you believed that the United States government has killed people for trying to go public with a story. Really?
Those are concerns that certain scientists on the program that are known to me, presented that to myself, but I did direct them to the appropriate authorities on that. That's something that I don't know firsthand. That's something they espouse, but because of the serious nature of that, I directed them to the appropriate authorities, such as the Inspector General staff and law enforcement. So I can't speak to that because that's something that they espoused, and I directed them to the right authorities.
Other people were worried about that, not you.
I had some unique things happen in my personal life that, were some of the causal factors for me to file a complaint, some things that my wife and I had noticed, some intimidation. I can't get into the exact nature. I did provide that information to the Inspector General, and hopefully they've referred it to appropriate federal law enforcement and counterintelligence personnel. But I can't discuss that publicly because of the sensitive nature of that for my own protection and for the integrity of the investigation.
Yeah, because if you really believe that the government has done that in the past with people who've tried to expose this UFO program, why are you still alive? You've done more to expose it than anyone else.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I went public, and certainly I was shown that, they can touch me at any time, and that's what led me to not only contact my former agencies, counterintelligence folks with, what I witnessed, and I provided evidence to that fact, but filed the complaint, and certainly going public was the appropriate move for me for my own protection.
Tucker Carlson recently spoke with Redacted co-host Clayton Morris, saying he hasn't even told his wife that what he's learned on this elusive subject. Let's watch.
The second thing that bothers me is the UFO story. And, the more you dig into that and talk to people with actual knowledge of it, again, that's another story where there are some, fanciful ideas floating around that are just, there's no evidence that they're true. But if you talk to people who, have actual knowledge of it that they gathered themselves, there are parts of that story that I do not understand at all that are really, really, really dark. It's so dark that I, haven't told my wife about it. I mean, I haven't verified any of this, but this is not just stuff that I read on the internet. I know you all are very, very grounded in that story, so I think I know what I'm talking about. Yeah. But there's some stuff there that's just like, man, I'm not even sure what that means. There's a spiritual component there that I don't fully understand. So yes, that story bothers me. And I think, last thing I'll say, that one of the reasons that we've had all these disclosures and all these, 10 whistleblowers at this point, and it hasn't really become front page news. Part of it's suppression. Parts of the government don't want you to know about it, but part of it is the public can't deal with it. It's too far out.
But some are critical of this particular exchange, saying Morris and Carlson never provide evidence, sources, or a reason for withholding that information. All right. So let's maybe go with the Grusch stuff.
Right. So Grusch is saying that he knows people who felt threatened for trying to come forward with information, or even that people were killed for doing so. And Elizabeth Vargas said, okay, but that's not necessarily based on your experience. And then Grusch said, well, obviously he hasn't been killed. He's alive. He's testifying. But he did he had fears for his for safety or for some kind of harassment based on what he's doing.
But based on what he's experienced, he said, they've shown me they can touch me. They've shown me that they know how to touch me in my life.
Well, he might be referencing the fact that there was a lot of negative reporting about him, actually, that The Intercept did. We talked to Ken Klippenstein about it. It was Ken's reporting on his history of I think it was substance abuse, that kind of thing. So he might mean that they tried to delegitimize me. They tried to smear my reputation for speaking up. Which is not.
Do you think that's the same? I mean, not at all to minimize the kind of coercive power of doing something like that. And certainly the government has demonstrated
The state has tremendous coercive
yes,
power.
and the government has shown its willingness to do that in a million different ways, sending threatening letters to Martin Luther King, wiretapping him, all that sort of thing. So I credit that. At the same time, that wasn't exactly the question, right? What Vargas was pushing him on is this idea that his life has been threatened and that other people's lives have been threatened to the point of actually killing them.
Well, who's doing the threatening and who's doing the killing?
And where and who is it that has been apparently killed by the government? That's a very serious charge. I mean, we up until this point have been talking about a hunt for potential alien spacecraft and alien bodies. Should this be a manhunt for human beings that have been killed because of knowing too much about this
I want to know
program?
what agencies are responsible, and then we need to hold them accountable if it is the case, or we need to investigate them and find out it's BS.
And he says, I pointed them to the proper authorities, but
the authorities are the ones doing this. You're saying so. What isn't the proper authority? Sunlight disinfectant. We need to know. At some point, you're going to be. You're not saying they're already out. From your perspective, your claim, they're already out to get you and your people for having this information. Isn't you need to get it out there?
Yes, and he says that about himself. Again, when Vargas asks him, well, what about your safety? He says, well, that's part of why I came forward. So there does seem to be a little bit of a gap.
If somebody's threatening you, you're not safe. Like you're not, as long as I satisfy them, you're already,
right.
Do you know what I mean?
So
and
then
further
coming
compliance
forward is
not,
the safety. And he says that about himself. I came forward just there in that interview. I came forward in part because I felt threatened and I'm less exposed. And something happens to me now, it would seem suspicious. So why is that good for the goose but not good for the gander?
Yeah, that's a fair question.
Now, going on to the interview, the Tucker Carlson interview, there was a lot of insinuation, a lot of and raised eyebrows and deep swallows, gulps of trepidation. Is it misleading to have those kinds of interviews as a journalist?
Well,
without more. They both basically said in the clip that we watched, they personally have knowledge of more, much like Grusch. They personally know more. Is it that Tucker Carlson feels threatened? He says he said he characterized it as too out there to talk about. He didn't want to talk about it to his wife because it was too out there. What does that mean?
Yeah, I don't know. I thought perhaps maybe he was just referencing, the videos of unidentified aerial objects, or maybe he's seen some of them that the public's not seen, or that maybe people like his guest have shared with him. Obviously,
that are too much to discuss with your wife.
I don't know. Like he said, there's a spiritual.
He did a spiritual component.
I don't know.
I mean,
maybe he's seen something. Maybe he's seen something.
There are people who think that there's a conflict between the idea that there is a God in any kind of traditional sense and aliens. What does that do to theological practice if we are not God's only people? Do aliens have a different God? Is our God local? Is he really omniscient? These are the kinds of, I think, theological questions that aliens raise. And I don't know if that's what he's alluding to.
Well, that depends on what your religion is, maybe. I don't know that it's a conflict with... I don't think aliens necessarily conflict with the Catholic perspective, which was the religion in which I was raised. I don't think so, because they could just be... Other sentient life could have been created by God as well, or something like it. The Bible's just, for Catholics, the Bible is not the divine word of God. It's kind of like it's inspirational stories for lessons. It's not the Pope is the center of is the authority on religious truth.
And the debates around things like evolution and dinosaur bones, those aren't implicated in Catholicism the way they are in some other religions. No. Interesting. All right. Well, let us know what you think about this one. How are you reading that Tucker Carlson interview and some of the insinuations? And what do you think is really holding Grusch back? We want to know. And do you support my plan to just figure out where the facility is, I'm going to do a January 6th on that facility that's hiding the alien crafts. We're gonna march. We're gonna take back our country with strength. Okay, Rafi.
In recent reporting, author Michael Shellenberger writes that multiple sources have confirmed whistleblower David Grusch's claim that the United States government possesses a number of non-human vehicles. These sources are, quote, either high-ranking intelligence officials, former intelligence officials, or individuals who could be verified as being involved in the United States government UAP efforts for 3 or more decades, according to his reporting. Shellenberger writes that the individuals said they had seen or been presented with, quote, credible and verifiable evidence that the U.S. government and U.S. military contractors possess at least 12 or more alien spacecraft, some of which they shared with AARO or the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, quote, which AARO has refused to provide Congress. The office reportedly said it has not discovered any verifiable information, and, quote, because it does not have the authority to verify it and may not want to verify it. Joining us now to discuss is Twitter Files author and author of Apocalypse Never, Michael Shellenberger. Thank you for being with us, Michael.
Good to be with you.
So, confirmation, aliens are real. This is exciting. What do you make of the baker's dozen of alien spacecraft that we have?
Well, I think it's worth just pointing out that this is very shocking. The whistleblower in question, David Grusch, used a term ontological shock, which is a little bit of jargon, but what he means is that the idea that we are not alone in the abstract is something that everybody, I mean, not everybody, but many people, the large majority of people agree with, that we are almost certainly not alone in the universe. However, the idea that there may already be contact or have been contact for quite a while between the U.S. military and non-human intelligence, non-human life forms is very shocking, and it's shocking for me personally. There's things I kept out of the story that I think were just too shocking and certainly harder to confirm. But I do think it's clear that the conversation about this has progressed from the idea that the Pentagon simply has some videos to a large and growing number of people with reason to know who say that, in fact, there are non-human spacecraft.
That is very intriguing that there's things that you left out of the story. I hope that you'll continue to investigate them. I'm wondering how exactly these sources determined that these crafts were non-human. Was it the material they were made out of, the method of construction? How exactly did they make that determination?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there wasn't much doubt. There are programs, according to these folks, that exist to not just study these technologies, but attempt to reverse engineer them. There was some, disagreement or different levels of knowledge about the success in that. Certainly, the idea had been that there was efforts to try to operate these craft or reverse engineers to create them. There's one very interesting story, which is that a major aerospace company apparently tried to involve greater civilian scientists and engineers to reverse engineer the vehicles, because the stovepiping or compartmentalization that exists really prevents the kind of innovation and sharing of knowledge that's actually essential to being able to achieve scientific and engineering goals. And so there was a very briefly floated idea to involve a larger number of scientists and engineers that was apparently rejected by the Pentagon. So these are, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. At the same time, extraordinary claims, you don't need extraordinary evidence to simply investigate them. And the claim here is that these craft are real physical objects. This is not a mass hallucination, that they exist in specific military bases or in contractor facilities, and that members of Congress could go and actually find these facilities, or go and actually make sure they get their way in there and try to find these craft themselves.
So obviously this is amazing that we have the craft at all, but I can't help but wonder, were there pilots of the craft? Do we know anything about that? Is there anything you can say to that effect?
David Grusch, the whistleblower, did say on News Nation that there were, in some cases, non-human pilots.
What?
I did have confirmation of that from one of my sources. I kept it out of the story, in part because it was one source, and also I felt like I really wanted to established that there is strong evidence that there are craft, and I didn't want to get too much into what I had been told about the different potential of there being beings. It's a lot of ontological shock with just the craft, and I felt like, let's just give this a minute and let's spend a little bit more time doing this reporting. I would also say I'm not the only person that's interviewing these folks. There are other people in my article. I mentioned former Assistant Defense Secretary Christopher Mellon mentioned at least 4 witnesses. I think he said in his article in Politico over 4 people. I don't know if those are the same people I spoke to. We don't share information with each other, but there's more people that are finding the courage to speak. They're very scared. They don't want to lose security clearance, and they're also worried about retaliation. And David Grusch, as you know, the whistleblower, felt like he needed to go to Congress because he was subject to retaliation.
I actually have chills right now hearing that there were potentially non-human pilots that were recovered along with the craft. That suggests to me that these were craft that crashed in some way, and that's how the U.S. military was able to recover them. Is that correct?
Well, actually, that's there are cases of that. There are people that say that there were crashes. There's also cases of what they call this a retrieval program. There's also cases, I was told, of craft being abandoned and craft making its way into U.S. military hands in other ways. And so I think that it's not just that there is crash evidence, but there's also other mechanisms in which these craft have been obtained by the U.S. military.
So it sounds like, from what you're saying, your contacts are based in the United States. You've talked to military officials, people in the intelligence community in the United States. This figure, 12 or more, is specific to the crafts obtained by the U.S. military. Do we know anything more about potential crafts or pilots globally?
Well, Grusch, the whistleblower, said in his statements that there is competition between the United States, China, and Russia in terms of developing reverse engineering these technologies. I should say that was not something I was able to confirm. And it wasn't that people disconfirmed it or denied it. It was just that the people I spoke to did not know that if Russia or China had these technologies or similar craft. I would also say, just on a personal level, I felt comfortable doing this story in part because of Grusch's whistleblower testimony. Like the people I interviewed, I felt like somebody needed to kind of speak up and say that what he's saying is not unusual, that you can find a fair amount of people that will talk about this off the record, or in my case, not for attribution. I will say I haven't written any commentary about the piece itself. I am planning on writing more about it, but I have actually been interviewing people for several years and only felt comfortable at this point, and in part I felt obliged to share this research and to go back to folks. But I've been talking to folks for a long time, in part because you may know I have spent a long time working on nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is a dual-use technology, and it was actually in that work that I started to come across a lot of evidence of UFOs, or what have been rebranded UAPs, but a significant amount of interaction of these UAPs and UFOs, including the most famous alleged crash in history occurred around nuclear weapons test sites and also nuclear weapon sites.
Is there any connection, Michael, between this existence of the UFOs or the non-human entities and nuclear research?
There's definitely something going on that I certainly don't entirely understand. There's, in fact, there's a major book. I've interviewed the author of it, called UFOs and Nukes, that describes many cases of anomalous UFO activity around nuclear weapons sites, but there's also been significant UFO sightings and reports around nuclear power plants. The nature of those interactions suggests that whatever is behind those craft is expressing some concern around these sites. I'm very reluctant to get too far into it, in part because I'm a big supporter of nuclear energy. I think it's the only way to really address climate change and other important environmental issues. So, but nonetheless, nuclear obviously is as a weapon is a very powerful and potentially dangerous technology. And so it does seem like there is something big going on there. And I would just note, we have civilian control of our military in the United States. And we've now done stories on FBI whistleblowers, and we're very concerned about the role of the intelligence community in encouraging censorship by social media platforms. And for me, even though I have been looking at this particular issue for a long time, we have a situation here where we have a very important whistleblower who the intelligence community's inspector general said has credible and urgent information. We have the DOD's special department on this, which is called ARROW. In April, the director of that program said that there was no credible evidence. The inspector general contradicted that. That now the DOD spokesperson told us and others that there's no verifiable evidence. However, this evidence does appear to be verifiable. You need to go into these facilities and look for these craft. I think there may be resistance, but again, we have civilian control over our militaries. And I think there needs to be a very clear statement from members of Congress, particularly Senators Rubio and Gillibrand, that this is not up to the military to decide what to withhold from us. This is the right of the American people to know what our tax dollars and what our militaries are doing. And if there has been some bad behavior, we know there's been cover-ups. And by the way, I will point out, this is a New York Times story from 1978, New York Times Magazine story about Pentagon covering up of UFO information. So for me, if there's nothing there, and we should keep an open mind that maybe there is nothing there, we keep an open mind on both levels, the military needs to open up. It's way past time for this. It's civilian control of our military and intelligence services. And I'm afraid that we're not seeing the levels of disclosure that I think that we deserve to see. It is ontological shock, but I do think we are grown-ups and we're capable of dealing with whatever the truth may be.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. This is in the public interest. So thank you so much for joining us, Michael Shellenberger, and congratulations on the good reporting.
Thank you for having me.
Team up we've all been waiting for, including me, even though I'm more of a skeptic than many of the people watching at home. UAP whistleblower David Grusch sat down with Joe Rogan for 3 hours to talk about his experience testifying on Capitol Hill. And of course, Rogan asked some of the questions we've all been wanting to ask ourselves.
So when it comes to these, I'm going to bring it back to these actual entities.
Yeah.
Do we know, or would you have an understanding of how many of them we're talking about? And the variety of them?
Well, yeah, there is a variety, and we have a certain number of different things. But the total numbers of what's interacting with us on Earth, nobody knows that. And
but there's an understanding of some that they do believe are interacting with us, and there's a variety in terms of there's variables.
Yeah, I talked to people who are familiar with the biological analysis and everything. So we have some idea, not a complete picture, because it's you're looking at it, it's well, I don't even understand the physiology at all. It's what the heck? It's way different, right? So we have at least
a description of this physiology.
Yeah, no, I was in the room when gotta be careful. I don't want to. I was in Washington, D.C. with a very number of senior people that work for members of Congress, put it that way.
Here's the rest of Grusch's answer.
I brought the people who worked on that stuff to the Hill. This is why the members were so confident to put out the Schumer amendment and stuff. And I was like, please explain. And they went into all those details and stuff. And I remember, some of the professional staff members were like, whoa, like they were in G-Lock, right? Because it a total world bubble got burst right there for a lot of people. And so we have some idea. It's not a complete picture. It's just but you're not even bringing in the right people. I think about my friend and colleague, Dr. Gary Nolan, which I started the Soul Foundation nonprofit with. He's Nobel level biologist, virologist. Like, he's the guy that you would want on it, but he's not on it. So I think we can make a lot of progress in our understanding once again if this is more broadly studied in an open environment.
So my frustration whenever we hear from anyone involved on the UAP front is that I always want then more details. Why can't you say, because there he catches himself a couple times. He goes, well, I can't say more on this XYZ. Why can't you say more? Somebody needs to say more at some point. If what's being alleged, there remains of physiologically different entities that do not originate on Earth, and they're being kept in a room or in a vault somewhere where I would like to see them. The people should be able to see them. It's always so Grusch says that he knows people who've seen them, or he's able to he's kind of doesn't describe them. It's not enough. It's so close to the information we want, but we never take the extra step of just disclosing whatever it is, which I hope should be disclosed. And there's always a kind of insinuation that I can't say more because I could get in trouble, or the government. Well, then what is the agency or official or person who has said you can't say more? Because then we need to get that person to stop doing censorship.
Well, I think there's multiple classifications of apparent secrecy here, and it seems quite purposeful. The other thing is, I'm not exactly sure how much the American public generally cares right now with cost of living and housing and other things that are, untenable in terms of their everyday lives.
There's aliens?
Are aliens taking up the housing? Are aliens driving up the prices? Like, I don't know how.
Okay.
There are whole memes across Black Twitter about this. Unless aliens are helping paying bills, like, we're not concerned with whether they exist or not.
I did not know that.
It is hilarious. I will have to send some of them to you.
Okay.
I think that, at any given point when you have multiple people from both sides of the aisle at this point, seemingly not fully exposing something that they know, specifically with many questions that have arisen around extraterrestrial life or whatever you want to call the beings that we don't really give a name to, whether their existence, but also how long we've known about them, where they come from, the composition. Those things are important for our scientific reasoning. I don't know how much of our government is ever going to really tell us.
I find that infuriating. I think I don't agree. I think if it's true,
is it a national security concern?
Well, yeah. If it's true, it's like the most important information that would ever have been disclosed in all of human history, all of human civilization. I think I'm not persuaded that it's something other than BS. Personally, I don't think they have all this evidence, and they're not showing it because they don't have it, and it doesn't exist, and it's not real.
But then what is up with the
farce? If it does exist, it's huge.
But why would you, and I guess this is like deeper than his discussion, what would the point of the farce be? To have these people who are like, okay, well, we know something, but we can't tell you the something that we know. There may be some remains here, but we can't really say, anything about them. Yeah. What is the point in this dog and pony show that doesn't actually lead to a show?
Publicity? I don't know. They might, again, most of these people are hearing this secondhand. So they might fully believe, I'm not accusing David Grusch or anyone else involved in this of saying anything that they don't think is true. But a lot of this information even comes to them secondhand. They'll say, well, I know someone who saw, we have a report, or we have evidence that's been kept quiet about someone describing what they saw. And I fully believe those accounts do exist. And I believe they're being covered up by the government and they ought to be released. I don't think they will ultimately reflect a true finding of alien life. If they did, that would be remarkable, and we really ought to know about it, because it would be transformative. It would be huge.
Knowing that there are not necessarily alien life, but organisms, that life can grow in other places, be it whether that is biological or otherwise, I do think is important in our study in general.
They describe crafts as well. They say, not just like a piece of mold on an asteroid or something. That seems perfectly plausible. That doesn't seem so beyond belief. But they said they've identified crafts, so an intelligent enough life to assemble an interstellar space object, an object that can move across space. Something of it, what they're describing sounds like something of a technological capability. That is pretty extraordinary.
Or an intelligent enough human that just planted it there.
Well, it could be that. Could be us from the future. Could be artificial intelligence. Like, there are a lot of options. All of them would be major revelations and would change the scope of human society. We could learn from their technology. I mean, to truly learn that we're not alone in the universe, that there's other intelligent life out there, that would be. I mean, that discovery is something that a lot of people anticipate will happen one day. I don't know that it will, but maybe it's already happened and the government's keeping it all secret. That's very frustrating if it is the case.
We'll see, and well, not from Grusch or any of these others, but I do think that information will come out, and when it does, there's going to be people who've been waiting with bated breath for their aha moment for years. Yeah. So this is going to be a very exciting moment for them. I call it BS all the way around. So we'll see in the future.
All right, we're two skeptics, but even if it happened, you'd be like, inflation is the real issue. I don't know about that, Amisha. I don't know. More Rising right after this.
Decorated former combat veteran David Grusch went public last week with claims that the U.S. has a decades-old UFO retrieval program. Grusch also dropped the bombshell allegation that people have been killed by, quote, non-human intelligences. Here he is on News Nation. Let's watch.
We're definitely not alone. Absolutely, the data points empirically that we're not alone, yeah.
Do we have bodies? Do we have species of
Well,
non-human?
naturally, when you recover something that's either landed or crashed, sometimes you encounter dead pilots. And believe it or not, as fantastical as that sounds, it's true.
Grusch, who previously worked as a representative for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, where his job was to help investigate UFOs, also said recently, quote, "I think the logical fallacy there is because they're advanced, they're kind, we'll never really understand their full intent, and that's because we're not them. But I think what appears to be malevolent activity has happened. That's based on nuclear site probing activities and witness testimony." Grusch went further, saying the U.S. would do anything, including killing people, in an effort to keep this secret.
Yeah, so I'm fascinated by this. I don't mean to nerd out again, but this idea that we can perceive beings as malevolent because we don't understand their behavior is a core principle of Star Trek and why the Prime Directive is so important, the non-interference principle. An early episode with this thing they called the crystalline entity. This thing was going around, destroying planets, causing chaos, this big crystal rock-like thing in space. And they realized, this happens a lot in Star Trek, oh, it's just trying to feed. Oh, it's just trying to eat. Oh, it doesn't really realize what it's doing or the impact it's having on other species. And it would be interesting to interrogate whether or not, I mean, this is also the doomsday scenario of so many sci-fi movies. An alien comes, a human overreacts, shoots them, et cetera, and now we're in an intergalactic war. So there is something, I think, kind of satisfying and interesting about someone contemplating that it would be actually difficult to judge the intent of a UFO.
What are the odds
ET?
we encounter or they come here to encounter us, an alien or extra-dimensional or extraterrestrial, a non-human intelligence, but that is like within the ballpark of our intelligence level? What I mean is, like, they're interested in our nuclear stuff. Like ants don't have any relationship to human beings. Like, ants don't go about their lives thinking, what do the human beings think, right?
They're pretty interested in our picnic having behavior.
But we're not perceivable to the ants. We're so different and distinct.
But isn't that kind of the point?
It will be like that with aliens.
I think that's exactly what we're saying. That me and Grusch is what we're talking about, is the idea that because ants don't perceive us, and we largely don't pay attention to ants, there are behaviors that we engage in that really have nothing to do with the ants, but that are harmful to them. Let's say we build a condo and it digs up an anthill, right. And there are behaviors that they have that are at least irritating to us, if not harmful. There's fire ants and more dangerous kinds of ants. But it's not really about us. They're just protecting their territory or trying to come to our kitchen for snacks or whatever it is. So I think that's a really significant possibility.
But what is being suggested is a similar level. Oh, they have crafts they're recognizably non-human, but we can kind of see that they're spaceships. They're interested in our nuclear secrets. That's like encountering like another country or something, or a human species, like a similar Earth-like planet with similar. Do you know what I mean? That's too close to like what our intelligence and interests and how we do things is. Like a genuine alien will be like. It might not even be perceptible to the human in the way that in the way that microscopic organisms are not perceptible to us.
That's a fascinating point, because Grusch also weighed in on that. This is from an article in New York Magazine that is a skeptic of Grusch and has tabulated what it considers to be more of his outlandish claims. One of them says, I don't want to necessarily denote origin. I don't think we have all the data to say, oh, they're coming from a certain location. He proposed the vehicles the Pentagon is hiding could have come from a different physical dimension as described in quantum mechanics, saying, we know there are extra dimensions due to high energy particle collisions, et cetera, and there's a theoretical framework to explain that. Does that help? Does that help for you, or does that make it worse?
No, I think that's all possible, but that does not at all, to me, resemble what we're talking about when we're talking about flying objects people have seen and recovered pieces of ships and technology and weird glimpses of things in the desert or where else. That is very different, and thus I think largely a hoax and not true. When an actual alien presence will be as different to us. It'll be like a shadow or an ink blot or something. It'll come from it'll not be something we can even it'll be so foreign, so different to anything that it's almost like beyond our imagination.
Yeah, I really like that. Some people have critiqued, Star Trek and other sci-fi shows for this humanoid paradox. Yeah. Why does every alien basically look like a human with makeup on?
Well, because the costume design was not very good in Star Trek.
Right, we didn't have sci-fi. They didn't have special effects back then, where you could have blobs of clouds moving through the hallways or whatever. Yeah. But the way they do try to explain it in Star Trek, one of my favorite episodes, there's an arms race. There's this message embedded that somebody finds in an archaeological dig somewhere, and everyone's looking for it. The Federation is trying to get at it because they think it's like a fun artifact. The Klingons are going after it because they think it's a weapon. So are the Romulans. Everyone's chasing this thing through space, and when they find it, spoiler alert for a 30-year-old episode of TV, they discover that an old alien race that died out millennia before any of us evolved out of the primordial soup knew its race was dying out and scattered its DNA across the galaxy, causing everybody to evolve in the same way.
You have to come up with some kind of explanation along those lines, or else it would be...
But Grusch, I will say, he's not claiming little green men or something that just looks like a human in makeup or a small child in makeup. I think that what he's been talking about does contemplate other dimensions, non-human corporeal forms, non-corporeal forms, and he's been very clear again that he has not personally laid eyes on any of this. He was told by a source about the reality of some of this stuff. I also want to push back, Robbie. I saw some interesting pushback against some of your points. Some of your points from the last UFO segment. You mentioned that it was incredible to you that aliens would only have landed in the United States and only in rural areas, and what are the odds, et cetera, et cetera. It's worth noting that Grusch says the first UFO case he was briefed on involved a vehicle downed in Italy in 1933, decidedly not America. The Mussolini government had allegedly kept it in storage to the end of World War II. Pope Pius VII back-channeled the existence of the object to the United States, which it obtained in 1944 or 1945. So the argument is...
Was that one of the sequels to the Da Vinci Code, or is that a real thing that happened?
They're gonna eat you.
I know. Look, you have to... I'm just expressing my skepticism of, all these subjects. Or maybe there's another dimension, and evil Robbie from dimension 19684X crossed here, killed and replaced the real Robbie, and is trying to throw you off the set.
I think that's likely. I also love that you're Scully and I'm Mulder in this dynamic.
Wonderful. More Rising right after this.